Good evening, everyone. I'd like to bring together this King George County Board of Supervisors CIP budget work session. I will open the floor up for public comment. Seeing no public for comment. Mr. Dines, anyone online for public comment? Board, does anybody got anything that needs to be read into public comment? Okay, very quick public comment. Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have for you again just the review of the projects with the Planning Commission priorities. And we will also just update you. I think you have something at your individual seats there. Mr. Cusenberry, our county engineer, had consulted 2 firms and has a cost estimate for the needs assessment for a new preschool. That cost estimate should be $60,000 is what he was able to come up with. He based that, the courthouse needs assessment was in 2017 was 117,000, 116,000, I believe, but that was it was like a 4-phase type of a project. So the scope was much larger. So if we're focusing just on the preschool, there was a $60,000, and you can see what is included in that: programming and conceptual design to include room for expansion, site plan to include amount of land and parking that would be required. It does not include the search for land. It just identifies how much land would be needed. So again, up there is your list. If you, and I think some of you all may have that if you want, but it does list again the project priorities that the Planning Commission had identified in terms of their meeting back on the 9th of August. And I think the next step was we were just going to review available funding. And so Ms. Hahn was going to talk to you about the amount of resources that we do have for the CIP for this year. And then our next plan was to let Kyle from Davenport come and talk to you about some capital planning analysis, long-term financing, those kind of things. And then, of course, we would take your priorities and your discussion and directions. And then the last thing we had was a recap and the next step. So, Ms. Hahn.
Okay, on this slide, you'll see that after the funds that we've already committed, the other $150,000 for the broadband, $400,000 for the sheriff's vehicles, $237,000 for, I believe, $237,500 for the HVAC unit for the upstairs, and then adding back in the remaining funds of $46,000 and some change from the fiscal year 22. We have $1,860,426 left in ARPA funds that are at your disposal. We included funding in the operating budget over and above for the 3 major projects. We have an additional $1,268,617. We still have in the bond interest. If you remember last year, we committed $450,000 of bond interest from the middle school to the security lights for the athletic fields at the middle school, and that bond interest can only be used for school projects. We have a remaining $394,000. School bus funds, we have $118,460 to go towards this year's purchase of school buses. And then project reappropriations, there's about $2 million in projects funding that is left over after projects are complete.
So I guess, doing rough math, you'd have about 6.5. And I think that kind of last year, I think we were at about 6.8. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm not sure, because I know we used the bigger portion of the 2.6 million from ARPA last year, as well as a couple million from reappropriations, and we had, I think, 1.9 in the budget. So roughly, yeah.
And obviously, the reason that Kyle is here is because you have some major projects that are listed on your CIP that are kind of driving your costs up. But I think, we all, in the discussions, you would need, some discussions about the big financing for some of those projects. So I guess we'll go ahead and first of all, is there any questions about the available funding?
So I never remember, for the ARPA funds, how do we determine what we can use it for exactly? Because we have a whole list of.
So we were able to use the revenue replacement up to $10 million.
Okay.
And therefore, once you use that definition of how you come up with your calculation, then it can be used for any means for normal government operations, but not for recurring costs.
Tracking. Okay, thank you.
Step right up, Kyle.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, always nice to see you. I have a hard copy handout that I'll walk up there real quick. Same things on screen. All right. Well, what we were planning is, as Mr. Miller mentioned, now you have the full details, the proposed CIP that you obviously deliberate upon, et cetera. But wanted to circle back, really after all the hard work that was done during the last budget cycle, and give you kind of an update on where you are with that multi-year capital planning that you may recall. And then really a strategy for how you go and enact and get some of the funding for a couple of the big projects that Mr. Miller mentioned. So that's really the focus of this presentation. We've got a very specific set of next steps that, with the board's overall approval, we could move forward with. But obviously want to make sure that we address any questions and lay out what that strategy is before we go do that. So on page number 1, again, an overview. The focus of the next couple pages will really be on what my terminology is kind of the bigger projects in the CIP, the building projects. And those are listed right there on the table. So we have the courthouse completion at 12 million, the E911 radio system at about 11.8. For conversation, I'm going to call that 12. And then the fire station at basically about 10 million is the planning estimate that we're working with right now. So in total, we have about 34 million of capital projects that are of a building, sort of variety that are factored into this. We know and very much aware that as you're working through your planning process right now, there's going to be other things that come up, other fire stations, school projects, et cetera, et cetera. So the focus here is we know, so to speak, that between the courthouse completion, E911 radio, we need to get funds in hand to be able to complete and do those projects and call it the very near term. We know and understand that the fire station is, under design and et cetera, in terms of planning. And so from a timing perspective, we kind of have that plugged in as the next up in terms of the, staging of the financing. But what I'll say is, you look at those middle bullet points there, is that our plan and our recommendation to you right now is to go borrow and get the funds for the first 2 projects, because we know we basically need those in the near term. that being courthouse, E911 radio, but we have built into all of this financing the fire station when we get closer to knowing the construction cost and actually needing the dollars for construction on that fire station. So that's why you see the first two highlighted in green. The third is highlighted there in blue. And so that's sort of the overarching assumption there in terms of those. Page number 2, in terms of interest rates, I think we've talked a little bit about this, but you're able to, as a county, capture some of those very, very low rates in 2020 and 2021. We're in an environment now where rates have moved up, and they are higher than those historic lows in 2020 and 21, but still at very favorable levels. And we'll show you a picture of that on the next page here. Second bullet point here on page number 2. We are very much aware, by virtue of all the hard work the board did with county administrator and Donna as well, to take some steps during your 23 budget process to make sure you've got good recurring cash flow to fund those capital projects. As we've rerun these numbers, I think the last time we did this was probably in April. Having those recurring cash flows coming from the general fund into the capital fund makes what you'll see in here very much sustainable, very much responsible. So when we go out and actually go do the borrowing, whether that's from banks or need to talk to the rating agencies, et cetera, we think it's going to set you up very, very well to kind of tell your story and show that you've done the things that you need to do to responsibly fund the capital projects and keep yourself as a county in good financial shape. So just some kudos to the board and the management in terms of the decisions you had to make during that budget process. And last bullet point there, you're highly rated. I didn't put necessarily the slide with the ratings in there. I think we've seen that a bunch, but with high AA credit ratings, everything we're doing in here is sort of designed and informed to make sure that we can maintain those to the greatest extent we can control that. So page number 3, interest rates. Again, mentioned this on the prior page, just gives you a visual here. Left-hand side shows you a longer history back of basically 40, 42 years, back to 1980. And what that shows us is that from a historical perspective, we're still in a very favorable interest rate environment in terms of the cost of borrowing, especially for highly rated local governments like you. On the right-hand side of the page, you see a little bit shorter time period from 2018 till 2022, basically the last 4 years. And that just shows you the impact of the pandemic, the follow-up through 20 and 21, very low rates. You're able to capitalize on some of those monies with some refinancing, also the initial courthouse financing, all done during that very low rate period. And so we find ourselves in a position where rates are higher than they were, but still very favorable. And that's kind of informed what we're recommending and talking about again here. So that then gets us to page number 4. What is our plan of finance and recommendation to you in terms of next steps? So that is to think about the courthouse completion, E911 radio, package those together, go out and do a singular financing for those 2 projects right now. We have a good sense of the cost of those. We know that the dirt will start moving. Really, with a radio system, there's not so much dirt to move, but when those projects get going, the cash flow, meaning the money we actually need to do the projects, will ramp up pretty quickly. So the thought is, let's go ahead and lock those funds in, borrow those by the end of the calendar year. A, because rates again remain favorable, and B, we've got a known cost with those 2 projects. The way we would go about doing that is a process we've used multiple times in the past, called a dual track approach. And so the first of those 2 tracks is we'll go competitively bid the financing to local banks, national banks, regional banks. Everybody gets the same sort of shot at it on an equal footing, and do that with your blessing really over the next basically 30 days. So the thought is, let's go ahead, well, we've got a solid window in the interest rate markets. Let's go ahead and do that competitive bidding so we can bring those results back to you. The second track that we'll compare that against is going out into the public marketplace, which is the same thing we did when we did the original courthouse financing. A little more involved process. We go out and issue securities in the public credit markets. We get credit ratings in a more formal sense. And so the lead time to kind of get that ramped up is a little bit longer. And so we purposely set this up so we can go get bank bids, bring it back to you, understand what those are. To the extent there's something that is attractive and we want to move forward with, we can do that. If not, we'll know that and we can very quickly pivot to the public sale over the next couple of months. And we have a time schedule in here that'll kind of walk through how we do that. So the next couple pages just give you a little refresher in terms of how we think about the capital planning, incorporating all those various capital projects, meaning the roughly 34 million from the courthouse, the radio, and the future fire station. We start with our existing tax-supported debt service. This is not service authority. This is everything that is basically paid from landfill revenues and out of the capital fund with the supplement that you now get from the general fund. We see it's about $7 million a year. It starts to tail off in some of those out years, and so we take that into account when we do the capital planning. We know on page number 6, we have our financial policy guidelines. We've had those for a long time. We've lived within them. The rating agencies expect that we will continue to do that. And cutting straight to the chase, with all this layered in, you will continue to be fine relative to those policies. So we'll show you what that looks like visually in a couple pages. That takes us to page 7. So getting into a little bit more detail in terms of the timing of this. So when we put all these pieces together, we're taking into account our existing debt service. We're taking into account debt service on the roughly $34 million you see in the middle of the page. We are taking into account the fact that out of the capital fund, we have to pay some regional jail costs. That's factored in there. And then lastly, we also factor in at the bottom of the page, there's going to be a solid amount of annual cash funding of capital. So over and above the debt service that we pay, we know that there is an amount that is a whole sort of series of projects each and every year that gets paid from cash, and it's not borrowed. That's a healthy thing to do. I think you know that. And for this planning purpose, we've assumed that's about 2.1 million a year. Some years going to be higher, some years going to be lower. That's purposely intended to be an average. And you're obviously going through that process of determining what exactly for FY23 those projects are. But for our planning, we assume it's on average about $2+ million a year. Then on page 8, I won't go line by line here, but you've got a variety of different funding sources with which to fund that capital. And Ms. Holland obviously just mentioned some of those in the outset. We tend to think about it in a recurring basis. So what are those revenues going to be year over year over year? We know that the landfill revenue continues to be solid. We have that plugged in at 7.3 million. We also know at some point there's going to be an end date to those landfill revenues. So we have that factored in as well, but not for, I think till about 2040. Landfill expansion payments, FY23 is the last year of that. We have that factored in. Again, in terms of item number 3, the dollars coming in from the general fund sets you up to really be able to do these things. If you recall the courthouse, when we did that financing, that really kind of tapped out, so to speak, those landfill revenues. And so by virtue of the actions you've taken as a board, you've positioned yourself to be able to responsibly take on these new capital projects. The rest of the line items won't go through in great detail, but in essence, really focusing on that capital fund and how do we maximize the resources and revenues that are available in that. So that then takes us to page number 9. So this is a graph and a table that is taking that existing debt service we looked at a couple pages ago, which is in the dark green at the very bottom there, and layering those three, call it major projects on top of that existing. And so the light green is the radio system. You'll notice that's paid over a little bit shorter time period on purpose. Those tend to have a shorter useful life. And so we purposely pay for that over a shorter time period. Courthouse is obviously a very major generational large building project, so that gets paid over a longer time period. We're going to work through some options with the banks. It might be 20, might be 25 years. We have 25 in here for the moment. And then the fire station, similar concept in terms of a large building project. It'll be around for a long time, so we've got that planned right now. Between 20 and 25 years, we have some flexibility. That takes us to page number 10. So on page 10, I mentioned those two debt policies that underpin our credit ratings. And you see on the left-hand side, debt service to expenditures. That's basically how many pennies out of every dollar in the budget are we using to make a debt service payment. Our policy says we want that to be really no more than 10%. We can have a 12% maximum, Governor, but really want to keep it closer to 10. And even with, which is that kind of bright yellow bar, the new debt service, we remain well below that level. So we're A, in compliance with the policies, and B, we have some capacity over and above what we're doing within this. Right-hand side, debt to assessed value. Again, we want to make sure that's below that 3.5% level where that red line is. By virtue of this, you end up at about 2.5%. So good capacity under both of those. We're not sort of pushing the limit, so to speak, in terms of either of those policies. So that gets to page 11, which has a lot of little tiny numbers on it. But this, if you go back to the March and April work, this is really the cash flows as they're planned out over that whole time period. If you were to go back to March and April, we were demonstrating how many dollars over and above what you had in the prior year's budget we needed in order to fund these capital projects. What you will notice is that in columns J and K, there's no numbers there. It's all zeros, because by virtue of what you've done in the budget, we really have sufficient revenues to cash flow what is identified in this work right now, meaning the 2.1 million or thereabouts of cash funded capital, plus the courthouse, plus the radio, plus the fire station to come. So from a budget standpoint, it is a very good situation, and that we have sufficient cash flow to do that. You'll notice that in bright yellow, we've assumed for the moment that the landfill revenues are basically going away as of 2041. And so we know it's kind of out in the horizon, but clearly within the planning of what you're thinking about right now. Not an immediate term concern, but something that we look towards and kind of use as a framework to think about A, how we structure this debt, and B, obviously how you think about economic development. Page number 12, this is really kind of a projection of that capital reserve fund that is over in the capital fund. And so we purposely have run this out a bunch of years. In fairness, once you get 5 or 10 years out, it kind of gets academic. But what this is demonstrating to us is that we have sufficient cash in the capital fund with the recurring dollars that come from landfill revenues and the transfer from the general fund to cash flow these various capital projects. What you'll notice if you look at that running balance on the right-hand side is that as some of the debt service starts to kick up, we do kind of spend down some of that capital fund. So we like to keep an eye on this to make sure that over the long haul, we have the sufficient dollars to pay for all this. It's one thing to think about, how are we doing in FY23, what decisions you're making there. We want to make sure that over that entire continuum, there's enough dollars there to support what is ongoing in terms of capital.
Chairman, can I ask a question? So page 7, you have the debt-funded projects that are included. I didn't see on there the preschool at all. included in any of the projections.
Yeah. And so I think what I'd say on the preschool, Mr. Collins and Mr. Miller may want to jump in there is we know that's in the CIP. It's kind of similar to the fire station, at least from our perspective, and y'all may have better information, but we know there's a lot of planning to be done on that. And so what we're trying to do for the moment is focus on those near-term projects, especially the courthouse and radio system, get those dollars in hand because we know we need to start spending on that relatively soon. And as you're going through your planning process here, be able to update some of this information as A, we know better numbers on the fire station, and B, as school capital projects, whether it's preschool or anything else, may come along. So it's an annual iterative process that can be updated. And Mr. Miller may want to jump in there.
Mr. Collins, these also represent the 3 projects that you all approved in the operating budget that the tax rate that you set was to allow, in addition to the operating budget that you approved, was also to approve that kind of capital for those 3 projects.
Right, like the fire station issued during the later part of calendar year 2023 into 2024. I would imagine that the preschool would be in the 2024. By the time they get through all the, I imagine that we'll capital fund that assessment. So I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't, I mean, in the future debt service or anything like that.
Yeah, well, again, I think to Mr. Miller's point, and others may want to jump in, as you're going through your capital planning process right now, I think what we're really trying to do is kind of execute on those first 2 things. We knew about the fire station by virtue of the budget. And then, as time kind of has its way of working through, to the extent that there is a school project and it's, ready to be funded, by all means, we can include it in these numbers and, kind of see what that looks like and update that planning accordingly.
And if I recall, also the direction that the board gave us last meeting was to find out a cost to do a needs analysis first before you committed to anything else. I know that you want to see that, and we will certainly do that. And if I can take just a moment, I know Ms. Bender was going to add something, but I think that perhaps this is also the time, maybe not today, but sometime over the course of the next 6 months to the development of the next budget, to have a conversation with school board about when is the 4th elementary school factored into their planning horizon, because it would make sense to have that project along with the preschool together, or at least very, very closely behind each other, so that you can maximize when you go to a bond issue, you can maximize that. And that's just something that my recommendation would be, start having those discussions. Because if they're talking about a 4th elementary school within the next 5 years or something like that, I know that there's some formulas that they have to get to, but that's something that you might want to have a discussion about.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to jump in on that one because I was going to suggest, once we have the needs analysis done, to maybe have a joint work session with the school board to discuss the 4th elementary school, if that is in their short-term planning, and hash out, what is needed, and have Kyle available to talk about the fire station, the preschool, Head Start, whatever, and a 4th elementary school. That makes sense, but we need facts and figures before we estimate how much it would cost or what kind of financing, correct?
That's right.
And a year from now, it might be totally different by the time, but we need that information, correct? So the needs analysis is vital.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that plays into all of it, and it's part of the thinking with the fire station too, is just the lead time to get all this stuff done. It just by virtue of the world and the supply chain issues and everything we can all talk about, it just takes a while to get these things kind of geared up. And so that's why we've kind of used and thought about with this strategy what I'll call more of a just-in-time funding, meaning we know with relative certainty, as much certainty as you know, that we need $12 million to complete the courthouse and 11.8 for this radio system. Let's go ahead and lock those dollars up, knowing that we've got some placeholders in the future for future capital projects. Because there's a long lead time to just get things designed and built, et cetera. And given that rates are favorable, but not as low as they were, we don't want to borrow dollars too far in advance and thus be paying debt service on something that's not going to be built for, for a couple of years.
So the $10 million for the fire station, that's not a hard and fast number either.
So it is based on Chief Moody's work that they've done with the, I guess they had a firm, is that correct, Donna? They had a firm that they have worked with, an architectural firm. I think he had a number in last year of 7.5. And I think we inflated it at up to 10 million because of the condition of the markets right now and, the construction market. So I think, clearly that, hopefully that number holds for a couple more years, but it is based on some degree of accuracy in that what Chief Moody had provided us last year.
So was the courthouse. See where you're at there. I just think that if we're going to look for this long term, and I'll stop after that. Long term, that we already know that preschool needs replacement, so that we should at least put it in the 24, 25, so we can see what the debt structure will be for that period of time.
Yep. We'd be happy to with some information. We can update all these kind of things. I think then, in terms of next steps, and be happy to answer any other questions that anyone may have, but with the board's blessing, so to speak, this evening, what we would propose is over the next basically 30 days, we'd go through that competitive bidding process with banking institutions. And again, that's local banks, national banks, regional banks. Everybody gets the same shot at it. And we would bring those results back to you as a board early October. So the thought would be October 4th. If we have that date right, we'd be able to come back to you with the results of that bidding process and a recommendation. If indeed we get some good things from the banks, and it is something that makes sense to collectively us make that recommendation to you, we could move very quickly to close thereafter. If for some reason a public bond issuance looks better, we can always pivot to that, and do so in the late September, early October timeframe. In terms of the rest of the schedule, the EDA is involved in a lease revenue bond issuance. They've done that multiple times. And so we just need to get that scheduled as we get closer to that. And then on the second page here, to the extent that we end up going to a public sale, that would more than likely happen during the month of November, and we'd probably close and have funds in hand in early December. So under either situation, by the end of the calendar year, those funds are in hand, interest rates are locked in, probably a little quicker with a bank loan, certainly a little quicker. But we want to see, again, what the banks will do for us or not do for us, bring that back to you and be able to make that decision. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any other questions anyone may have, or any other comments. Anything you'd like me to elaborate on, I'd be happy to do it.
So when you put it out for the banks, are you definitely going to do both, also the bank and public, or do you look at bank and then do the determination if you're going to go out to public?
More the latter. So we'll put it out to the banks and get those bids back in. And the way the banks work, they'll give us proposals that typically will give us a fixed and set interest rate for some time period. So kind of like if you've gotten a mortgage or refinanced a house, you might get a commitment from a lender and that says, all right, your rate is XYZ for the next 30 days. And if you close in that next 30 days, that's what your rate is. That tends to be how the banks operate. On the flip side, the public markets operate a little differently in that those rates are fluctuating every single day. So we can estimate those on our own without actually talking to anybody else aside from our bond desk. And so we'll get those firm commitments in from the banks. We'll do an apples to apples comparison about what that public market looks like and be able to bring that back to you on the 4th. So in essence, we can kind of measure them both at the same time. We just have to give the banks probably about 2-3 weeks to give us a formal proposal before we can do that head-to-head comparison.
Historically speaking, which one do you all see that works out better?
It's hard to say, and especially in this rate environment. The last couple years, rates for public sales have been lower than the bank marketplace. It's got a couple different factors to it. This loan at about $24 million, it'll be a good size loan for banks. It may price some of them out just from a size perspective. But there's been so much bank consolidation that there may be fewer banks that bid, but they've got more capacity. And so if this were 2020, 2021, the public markets looked much, much stronger. What we've seen in 2022, this current year, with all the volatility, those public markets have not been as reliably strong, which is part of the reason we want to do this banking side first and see what that looks like. It's got a lot of different reasons why the public markets haven't been quite as strong this year, but a lot of it's just the shock of how quickly the Federal Reserve has increased rates has made that market much more volatile. And so it really depends upon the market and the year and the time and the project, et cetera. Last couple of years, public markets have been a little stronger, but recently the banks have actually been a little bit stronger. So for instance, just to give you a couple little data points and then I'll move on, but we've seen a couple banks come in for smaller projects with a smaller entity that's not as creditworthy as you as a county that actually had a little bit better interest rate than bonds sold in a much larger quantity in the public markets. And so it really just depends upon if the banks or a given bank has an interest, has a capacity to make that loan and kind of sharpens their pencil, so to speak. We may get something very attractive, or we may not, and we can always pivot, and that's why we like to kind of keep all our options open.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Just a quick question, clarification. So we go out for the bond for these two items and say the courthouse comes back cheaper. Can we use that money on a future project?
Yes. Yep. Sorry, I started to answer the question before you finished it. Probably should let you finish, but yeah, the answer is yes. We'll make sure with Sands Anderson, your bond counsel, that the language is worded broad enough that to the extent it's cheaper, those dollars could be diverted into other, board-approved capital projects. Has to be a capital project, but as long as a board-approved capital project, then you'd have that flexibility.
I just wanted to make sure, because the market is volatile, maybe a miracle happens and costs go way down, so that maybe that could be used towards preschool, fire station, or whatever.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it as always.
It would probably be useful to get a motion in a second and to authorize Mr. Lauk to move forward and prepare all this.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Did you vote, Mr. Collins? Did you say? Okay, thank you. Chair votes aye. Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, so the next item on the list is just board priorities and discussions. I know that what Ms. Hahn and I would like to have is just some direction. If there's some projects on here that you don't want to even consider for 22, 23, or you want us to come back to you with a budget based on what we have available and what projects are on there. I think last year we were very fortunate that most every project got on there that was legitimately put on there by the department heads, and it was ranked by the planning commission. And obviously, we're very fortunate that we have the ARPA money that helps contribute to this. So the projects there is some degree of room for covering them, but I think we just wanted to hear from you.
Mr. Chair, may I make a suggestion? Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you. So my suggestion would be, perhaps since we know there are funds, the bond interest and the middle school expansion are for school use only, and that we have remaining school bus funds, might we start by discussing priorities for the schools first? Is that, yes? Okay. So I looked at, so the bond interest for the middle school expansion for school use only, there is $394,000 remaining. If we take the Potomac Elementary School ADA playground at 102, the Potomac Elementary School access system at 75,000, the preschool study at 60,000, that gives us 237,000 right there, if my math is correct, Ms. Hahn. So then I'm tracking out of that 394, there's another 157,000 remaining. We take that 157, add it to the 118,460 of remaining school bus funds. And we know we need 650,000 for school buses. That means there's a shortfall for school buses of $374,540. And that allows us to do, I know it's not the preschool replacement that you wanted, Mr. Collins, but it gives us the needs analysis that we've talked about. The ADA playground, and I know that wasn't ranked as high, and neither was the access control system for Potomac Elementary School. But first of all, we have a lot of special education kids. We have more than we've ever had before. And I've worked with those children, particularly at Potomac Elementary School, and some of them have needs and aren't able to access the playground. Last year, we did an ADA playground for one of the other elementary schools. I think it was King George Elementary School, because they didn't have one. And we talked about this last year. And so I would like to try to move forward with that ADA playground for Potomac Elementary School this year. And furthermore, given the environment nowadays with safety in the schools, I think it's important to get them the access control system that they need as well. So that's where I came up with the priorities so far.
Mr. Chairman, is that a go ahead? So in regards to the schools, the $70,000 for the study, or
$60,000.
$60,000 for the study. The school bus replacement would be a priority. The parking lots and driveways are not a priority. The preschool roofing is not a priority. The ADA playgrounds, they have a ability to apply for state grants. I think they should go down that road first. And the access control is the same. So the access control on the other schools was all paid for by the state. So I think they should take a shot at that before we fund that. So my main priority is the study and the sir, yes, sir. Thank you.
I would be on board with the study, the school bus replacement, and the access control system.
I would put down the access control at Potomac Elementary, the study, in lieu of maybe one of the bus replacement. I just think the access control, especially at Potomac Elementary, is very important in the study.
I would go along with the study, access control, school bus replacement.
If Mr. Stonehill, so if the board was looking for to minimize, you could do the school bus replacement minus one bus, which I think is $100,000, 102 or something like that.
How many buses did they ask for? 5.
5 to 6 is what's in their proposal.
6.
5 to 6. This year, in fiscal year 22, yes, in fiscal year 22, they ordered 5 buses, and that's why they had the remainder of the 118,000.
Okay, thank you.
So I would suggest 5 buses instead of 6, which would leave more opportunity for some of the other things that you all are interested in.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Ms. Hahn. Do you know how long I know with our ambulances that there's a long lead time. What is the lead time for the buses? Do you know?
I'm not sure the exact lead time. I know they ordered them in December, and I'm not sure if they've started coming in now or not. I'd have to double check that. I can maybe check on that while we're still here.
I just want to make sure so to factor that in if it is going to be a long lead time.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to see consensus of the board to direct staff to consult either our council or the school board's council with regard to what the risk or exposure might be for having one elementary school that does not have an ADA accessible playground.
So, Mr. Chairman, I still think that they should try their own avenues first.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not saying they shouldn't try to apply for grants, but at the end of the day, what do we value?
I would go along with Mrs. Lackey looking into that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right. So, I mean, under the ADA, all government facilities, including counties or, school systems, have to have a plan. And I assume they have a plan that you can have reasonable accommodations, which maybe you have another avenue where you can put somebody. But I do agree that there is something that we need to let Ms. Lackey look at and see. And I assume the school does have some kind of a plan of how they deal with
So if you're talking
individuals
about
with disabilities.
Mr. Miller, if you're talking about ADA, so we have a preschool that's not ADA compliant, and we also have a school board office that's not ADA compliant. There's no way to get to the second floor, which most of the offices are on. There's no way for that's not compliant, and neither is the preschool.
Okay, so what we're hearing is kind of a general consensus here is obviously the $394,000, which is exclusive for schools. We would have the preschool study, and then we'd have the access control. And then I'm hearing the remainder from that, which would be less 135,000. That would go towards schools in addition to the 118 that's remaining from the school bus replacement funds from last year that would go towards the school buses. However, I'm also hearing you want to find out ADA, issues, and if that's something that's a much more critical issue, then if it comes back that, that's a problem, then I guess we can bring that back to you guys and discuss that. Is that right? So how much then does that shave off of the school bus, the 650,000? Do you have that number? Quick.
So there's a couple of different conversations. I want to make sure that I'm got the right direction. The 60 for the study, 75 for the access, and then we're holding off on the ADA till we hear. Or are we including that number like Ms. Kupka included in her figures, where we were going to use 157,000 towards the school buses, leaving 374,540 that would be funded out of the somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I have one more
Did we
question.
want to reserve that, or did we want to include that 60, and then if we come back with the
I'm
or the
hearing,
102?
I'm hearing that you want to hold on the ADA until you get further information.
I just want one other clarification since we're going to the school board to ask a question, is to specify, is it just a preschool or preschool Head Start? Because that would be different for a needs analysis. Do you know what I mean? It makes sense preschool Head Start school board office, but we need a little more clarification on that, what they're actually studying.
So Mr. Kusenberry asked me to touch base with Dr. Boyd, and he said that the need was for 100 students and 25 staff members. He didn't say whether that was for both preschool and Head Start, but he said 100 students, so I'm not sure.
I would like more clarification on that, because that is a big difference. I would assume you have both. They should go together when you're making a building, then building 3 buildings.
Mr. Chairman, so Mr. Dines only has, community development only has one project, and that would be the document scanning. I would list that as a priority 1.
I agree.
Mr. Chair, under general properties, well, we're already doing the HVAC, so that is a need. But I would also agree with the relocation of the general properties.
What do you say about the community development document scanning?
Oh, I agree with that one too.
Good.
I was just,
Okay, good.
Mr. Chair. So unfortunately, solid waste, I have the skid steer listed at 4. I do.
I have that down as a necessity, given the presentation we received from staff and the impacts of the amendments in the past. That, to me, is a necessary piece of equipment for their job.
Okay, I apologize. I know Ms. Bender had made a comment about general properties, and I don't know if we got an official agreement from the board on what we want to do. And then we moved to solid waste skid steer. I think it might make it difficult for staff to track as we say some, like we just ran.
Well,
so I don't, I'm not trying to be rude, but like, can we go back to general properties and at least come to a consensus on what the board might feel about the relocation of the general properties?
What I would like is that if you give me a real hot, yeah, we'll make it work. If you give me I'm not really crazy as a group, then we're going to maybe hold that back. But I mean,
yeah, I know that, but
I'd like to be able to provide you a budget that includes all the things you guys are talking about, but I mean, if you want to vote on them, that's fine.
I'm not necessarily looking to vote. I'm just looking to see, Ms. Bender brought it up. And so I'd just like to have us all at least speak to it so that you can get that consensus and that understanding. Hey, I think that is one that they're interested in, and then we can hash it about later.
So
Just try to get it. So I am not in favor of moving forward with this one at the moment. I'm just going to say I have some other priorities. So
I think that one of the questions that was asked at the last meeting was, Mr. Collins asked about rents. Do we have that information?
About what? I'm sorry.
What we're paying in rent and what we're paying for, where they're at right now. I mean, they're out there by, the landfill. And I think that the whole concept was to bring them in. We looked first at the service authority site. I don't think that's going to be a great site because of the traffic. If you dump a bunch of other employees there in and out, I think VDOT's going to make us have a turn lane in there, which may not even be possible. So one of the two, there are two options that you could look at. So by the new courthouse, there is room that was built into a study, as Mr. Cusenberry indicated, that included a general properties facility. It also included a facility where the service authority could locate, a Butler building. Their operations could be there too. So that's an option. The other option is you could look at the back here of the Rivercomb building, because where the softball field is actually owned by the county. So there is some availability there. So I'm not saying that we need to do it right now. I think that what Mr. Muncie's just trying to say is, look, we're spending a heck of a lot of money in gas going back and forth, and it's way out there. So it's not really a central facility. And I think that's why we were looking at doing it. I understand it's a big price tag though.
And the rent for fiscal year 23, the one we're in right now, comes to $22,452.32. The contract, the lease agreement had a provision in there that for a 3% increase. And so the years, 3%, it splits in the middle of the year. So we've taken, the months that have the increase and the months that don't, and totaled that together for that 22,000. And it's my understanding that this is the last year of that lease agreement. And so we'll have to probably renegotiate at the end of this fiscal year.
I mean, I'd like to see him right there in the courthouse square as well, but I'm in agreement with Mr. Granger that, that's something that we can hold off and look at later. I mean, there's definitely a need, I think, but I don't think that's something we need to do right away.
All right. Well, what we can do is we can push that off to another. Okay. Wow. I mean, he didn't want to do a skid steer, so I wasn't expecting he was in favor of a general. Maybe I'm wrong.
I am in favor of.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm in favor of it at the courthouse complex, and a building that's fit more of their stuff in.
Right, and I think that's what Mr. Muncie had built in was a good sized Butler building, metal building.
I am also in favor of it. I know just from our tours of Ralph Bunch High School, there was a ton of their equipment, their snow plows and things are stored in that auxiliary building. And if we are able to move forward with that facility in some fashion, we're going to need another place to put their equipment. So, I agree with the cost savings in gas and the cost savings in rent. So yeah, I'm willing to move forward with it.
I think then that's three who seem to be in favor. So I'd put it on to officially track then.
We'll,
That was a yes.
Okay.
good.
I'm going to say, let's move on to skid steer. I'll let Mr. Stonehill take back over when he comes back. But since that was the next one I heard, I know Mr. Collins said he's not in favor. I believe Ms. Kupka gave the impression, I don't want to speak for her, that it sounded like you were in favor of the skid steer. I'm also in favor of the skid steer.
I'm in favor of the skid steer.
Okay, so I think we have three, although I think we should probably wait for Mr. Stonehill as well so he can officially give his stance. I think the sheriff's office is probably moot to discuss. I think since we've already talked about getting financing. Fire and rescue. We can come back and ask Mr. Stonehill still about the skid steer, just to get his opinion, but fire and rescue, I think the ambulance replacement, I know we do that every year. I think that makes a lot of sense to definitely move forward with. And I know that they asked about the Opticom preemptive system, which I think sounds really interesting. I like the idea of, but I don't think I'm prepared with committing the funds for that particular project. So that's my take on. And then the other two I know are further years out, so they're not necessarily for this year. So I'll let my colleagues speak to how they feel about fire and rescue.
So I would have the ambulance replacement as a number one. The Opticon, it is an interesting thing. Hopefully it can go next year. I think it'll, especially, the chief talked about traffic and, I mean, when I came from a previous meeting here, the roads were just full up. We had to wait 2 cycles just on Route 3. So I think that it would be a good thing to look at for next year for sure, but just not this year. And fire and rescue station is, you know, already there. And the last one, the planning commission put it at 4, but I think that even though we can't afford it this year, it needs to be a reality soon. Yes, sir. So that's why I didn't put it as a 1. I put it as a 3.
I think the ambulance is important, especially since we know how long it's going to take when we order one to get one, that it's important that just in case it gets even longer to get one. Opticon, I'm willing to wait because I would like some more information and maybe a more thorough presentation of, you know, a representative to come and talk about it and how a little bit more information. Chief Movie gave a really good presentation, but just a little more due diligence on it.
Mr. Stonehill, while you were out, they were talking about skid steer.
I think that's a necessity. I mean, I would be in favor of that. Given the presentation that Mr. Newchuk gave us, that I think that's a need for them up there.
Are you minusing this stuff as we go?
So for fire rescue, I'm in favor of the ambulance. And I know there are some opinions otherwise, but I am actually in favor of the Opticom preemption system too. I can see from, and I know you all have too, but running code myself, how that would be handy to be able to take care of that, so.
Well, the other thing is that if you know, you could get it in here and have the presentations with the vendor and, you know, do the kind of thing you're doing with the radio system where you've kind of committed to it and then you're going to develop it. And so I think you could get further information. We could put it in as a placeholder, and if it has to move out because you don't want it or you want to hold off, then you have that option too. So
Didn't make it into this year's though. That's what I heard.
Opticon is
Not in.
I think we've had 3 who said they prefer not to do it this year, but I would still like to hear Mr. Stonehill's stance as well.
I think it's an interesting idea. I don't think we need to do it this year. But if we did have a placeholder for later on down the road to get some more information on it, I don't think it's a necessity for this coming year. Ambulance replacement, of course, and well, I guess fire rescue facilities were already in the process of working on that. So ladder truck, I think it's something in the future we certainly need, but I don't think we need it for next year. So,
How about information technology?
He's over there waiting with bated breath.
How much money is left, Mrs. Vaughn?
I mean, I'm not keeping a running total, but I know everything that I have on the list here that we have funds that we can put towards each and everything that you all have identified right now.
That's why I was just curious how much was.
And when I was looking at it earlier today, there are funds for IT as well.
You know, those IT people are always asking for a lot.
Well, they keep us
819,000.
the 819.
That's all the.
That's all of his. No, the 819 is in the current year.
Then there's the new courthouse equipment, which is 1 year out, and that's
Right.
That's the only other planned. Aside from the ones that are recurring every year because of just regular recurring kind of costs.
Yes, the network management systems, that's an ongoing computer replacement. Like you mentioned, it's a little bit higher this year because we need to change out a lot of things at fire and rescue. The cybersecurity, that is required by the Commonwealth of Virginia. The voice over IP redundant server, that's so that if we have something with the main server here, if the phones go down, we'd have a redundant server that would keep the phone lines up. The enhanced 911 CIP compliant software, I think that's a big need. And then FCC mandated the Meraki equipment maintenance renewals. That is due this year. Is that correct, Chris?
It'll be May in 2023. So yeah, I guess.
Yes, this year.
So it will have to be paid this year if we want to keep our stuff for the firewall.
That's for all of the network equipment.
For all the
Firewalls,
network equipment,
switches,
so.
Wireless access points.
So I guess all of IT is necessary for this year.
That's what I was going to say. Even though it's a big chunk, especially with cybersecurity and all these state mandated, FCC mandated, I think the whole package is important.
So I'm not in that same mindset. Computer replacement, the countywide voiceover, and the Cisco are my top priorities.
I'm in favor of all of the requested projects for this year from IT.
Well, I was just going to make sure. I mean, two of them, they're required by the state and FCC mandated, so we can't really do anything about that. They're mandated. So I'm in favor of all of them except for the courthouse equipment, which is in the future.
Yeah.
I'm for it, but just not this year.
I'm in favor of all of them except for the courthouse equipment in the future.
And I am in favor of all of them, Mr. Dines, except for the courthouse for next year.
So, Mr. Collins, you'd asked for a running total. I tried to add it up. I might have messed up, but for everything except for administration and parks and recreation, I have a total of 2.684 million. But please, someone else go back and verify that I did not make a mistake. I think I captured everything, and that I didn't consider anything to do with the countywide 700 megahertz radio system because I know that we're looking to get funding, which we've already identified the line items in our annual budget in order to address that. So that's what I had it at, though. Currently, that we've committed to on projects. So still have admin and parks and recreations.
Ms. Hahn, how much would we have left then?
You had 6.5, not saying that you have to spend it all. Now you deviated 394, taken out of that 6.5. So you really had about 6.1, roughly, because you're already putting 394 towards the schools.
Well, if we went to the admin side, the turn lane is in the future, right? So, and then the other two are looking at from grant funding. So that would be in the end a zero, correct? Or do we have to have them there as a placeholder?
Well, the 140 is going to be on us because the original grant only gave us 500,000 for the roof, which is a construction project this year. And we had to take off the outbuilding or the mechanical building or whatever the garage shop building. And so that 140 is an estimate of the construction costs that we would have to probably eat if you wanted to go forward with that. It was not able to be in the grant.
So it wasn't, may I, Mr. Chair? So it wasn't in that grant, but we just put in for $1 million from the state on Friday, as well as November 8th, the National Park Service closes again for another $750,000. It is going to be, it can be in.
Well, that's fine. But what I'm saying is that it wasn't able to be in the grant from last year.
And we did not award it. When we awarded that contract, we did not award the maintenance building. So I just want to make clear, so there's no misunderstanding, that it's always been the intention to try to support these projects through grants.
Okay.
Yeah, so we did, when we awarded that contract, we only awarded it for the main building. Thank you.
For the grants, I'm going to ask just for clarification. So we need to put the marker in there to say that, yes, we've committed to if we want to apply for the grant, is my understanding. Is that a correct statement?
Not to apply, but if we accept the money,
Yes.
if we get the award, then yes, we have to come back and have it in the CIP, right, Ms. Hahn? So it doesn't have to be in the CIP up front. We have a couple placeholders for things that we feel pretty comfortable about, like the National Park Service grant. We already have a phase 1 award from them.
Okay.
We knew it was going to open again and we'd be in a position to put in a second time. It was put down for 500,000 because the past 5 or 6 years, it's only been for $500,000 is the maximum you can put in for. I actually learned on Friday, I went to the website, it is now open and they raised the ceiling to $750,000. So again, we only have to make sure they get in here if we get the award so we can spend the money.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Once we
asking.
get
So
that.
like from the perspective of when we approve the CIP, obviously I feel like we want to have it in there so it's been approved and we could then spend the money that would come in from grant funding. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, where these numbers came from though is all of these were come up with and brought to the Planning Commission before we had these new grant opportunities come up for sure, for certain.
And if the grants didn't come in, would we be absolutely committed to, I mean, we could, not that I don't want to do these projects, but it's just a matter of like, if like no grants were to hit, do we really want to bite off all of those, both those projects necessarily?
Well, that's why I'm okay with just what's here.
Okay.
I'm not looking right now to increase it to 1 million for the state one and 750,000 for the National Park Service one.
Okay.
I'm okay with, let's just keep it where it's at and let's see what comes in. And then if we have to at a later date amend the CIP.
Yes, we would have to hold another public hearing to amend the CIP
Okay.
if we were to get the awards.
Then I'd be in favor of including both those projects for this year with the anticipation of hopefully hitting those grants. That's my take though.
Mr. Chairman, so what happened to the debt mitigation plan?
That would be in our annual budget. It had been in the past. I know when COVID hit, we dropped it. I'll be honest, I don't know if I don't remember seeing it again. So yeah, that was just part of our annual budget of setting aside money from every year. That didn't have anything necessarily to do with cap. I mean, obviously it went towards paying our capital debt, but obviously, it was just, it fell off with COVID and then it just never got brought up until now.
I'd like to see that back on the table.
Certainly can consider it, although it would be for next our fiscal year. So, but yeah.
So Did y'all approve all the IT stuff?
They did.
I said it was fine with what's in admin, understanding with the first and third, we're seeking grants and the other ones in the future.
Mr. Collins, how are you with admin?
To tell you the truth, I don't quite understand the 500 and 140. You have to have that in there, but you're going to get that money from grant.
So specifically, I know that that's how we put it together. We put it together that it was going to be a grant because you had the study that was done from Wiley Wilson that was identified the structural concerns. And so we came up with the $500,000. And then I think, as Ms. Kupka indicated, the 140 for the school build, or excuse me, for the maintenance building, the shop, that would be an extra project that we were also identifying would be grant funded. And I believe that the Planning Commission specifically identified in their memo to you that they were only good with money for Ralph Bunch if there was a grant. They didn't want to see you spend money that wasn't reimbursed, you know.
That's what I'm asking. So
And you could also approve these projects, but not appropriate the funds until we know that we have a grant to cover them.
but that's why I don't understand. You're appropriating.
We're not going to appropriate, we're going to approve
Well, so you're approving capital improvements.
only on the premise that you will receive a grant. And at the time you receive the grant, we would come back and we would accept the grant and appropriate that to revenue and appropriate the funding for the project.
So would that zero out?
So that anytime you do your budget, you have to have your revenue and your expenditure. So on all these other projects, we'll come back and say that this is the funding for it, funding source, and this is the budget for the project. And we can hold off on those, just approving them in this plan, but hold off and do that piece for these projects at the time we receive the grant.
So if they got the grant, this would be zeroed out.
Yes, sir.
Just like it wouldn't be any funds from the county, yes.
Okay.
It wouldn't come from this list here.
Can't see that far.
It's
The available funds list.
Available
within
funds
your
list.
packet.
If you didn't get the grant, it would stay in as a project and we would just have to deal with it in future
Okay,
years.
Got it. Thank you.
Right, so it's not going to cost us money without the grant.
That's what I was trying to figure out.
So you good with admin the way it is? Grant money only?
Yep.
Okay. Last but not least, Parks and Rec.
Chairman, so I'm not a big fan of the Sealston playground because I truly believe that's a waste of money to have two playgrounds within 100 feet of each other. And if the talk was that parents don't want to be at the playground, well, they should be at the playground if their child's at the playground. So I would completely not be interested in funding that. The other ones were not highly rated either. So not highly rated was the park, Cedar Brooks Park restrooms and the repaving of the park. The dog park was highly rated for me because even though that might sound odd, what I heard in the zoning and what people want in King George, the dog park came up like unbelievable amount of times. So I would actually be interested in the dog park this year.
I would actually caveat that, Mr. Collins, because I know people really want a dog park, but I know that the Parks and Rec Committee have considered the site of Perkins Corner when it is decommissioned as a better place to put a dog park because of, being kind of away from the playground area, and that would be better. And since we're in the process of decommissioning, that might be a future need. Now, one other thing that I think is important is the capital equipment upgrades for the soccer goals and batting cages. My own daughter played a little travel soccer this year, and it's a beautiful complex, and I think it could be better utilized to make some money for the county for Parks and Rec if we had the appropriate batting cages and the soccer goals so they could have more tournaments. And with that being said, even though it doesn't make sense for the playground, as someone who used to coach and parents would come and play on other equipment because there was nowhere to play, it makes sense because especially in today's environment, the parents would like to watch their kid but have their other smaller kids in eyesight range so that nothing happens. And it is a bit of a distance away if something happened from those baseball fields to the playground that's at the elementary school, and the wear and tear on the elementary school's playground as opposed to if there was a dedicated playground at the Sealston complex. And then the last thing I would put out would be the Sidell Brooks Park Junior restrooms, even though I know that's a big outlay, but I have heard that a lot from people that a lot of people don't like to use the porta potty, and it's more appropriate to have proper restrooms. We have a park, but we have no restrooms. We got it now, a nice shelter, but we need restrooms. And I know that's a big ask, but I do think it's appropriate. That's all I got.
So, Ms. Bender, public restrooms, in that environment, there's, from a law enforcement point of view, people might want to use the restroom and there's a porta potty there, but there's negative effects for the public restrooms in a park facility. And the back to the playground equipment, parents need to be parents. If their child wants to play on the playground, they need to be with them. If their child is playing sports, that's what they came there for. Watch them play sports. We're not in the parenting business to build play centers so parents don't have to parent. So I'm actually pretty strongly against that, as you may hear.
If this might be something that we might want to ask Ms. Lackey to do a review, that if an injury to a child happens on the schools, I realize that it's all part of the county, but in some degree, there might be some separate liability here, and we might want to know if that is something that we carry. If, say, Mr. Clark is having an event and somebody wanders and they go onto the school one and they break an arm, is that a liability issue that the county carries, or is that something that the schools are carrying? That's just something I think that we might want to look at, just like the ADA question.
So the one at the other elementary school, King George Elementary, folks use that all the time in the evenings. So, there's liability when you have anything, but I don't think that the county Board of Supervisors need to worry about the school's liability. That's what they have their insurance for. And then if you talk about liability, if you put another playground over there, then you just revert it to the county, the liability.
Mr. Chair, may I? Yes, thank you. So I am in favor of the capital equipment upgrades, the soccer goals and batting cages at Sealston. I am strongly in favor of the Sidell Brooks Park restrooms. That is the only major park in our park system that lacks adequate comfort station, and I think that's important. I frequent that park and I see people walking and jogging around the walking path. I see soccer and football teams practicing and playing there, baseball on the diamond, and families on the playground. And I think that's really the next important thing that we need to do to round out that park. And then I also agree, the Sealston Sports Complex playground, I believe that is necessary. I can give you my own anecdotal experience being an assistant tournament director of a girls softball tournament at Sealston, and we were dealing with 11 and 12-year-old girls playing up on the diamond, and parents did not feel comfortable. I know this is it's not the same as far as a playground goes, but parents did not feel comfortable, given how vast that park is, even letting their girls walk all the way down to the comfort station. We actually rented bathroom trailers and put them up by the diamonds so that parents could maintain eye contact with their children. So for me, I kind of associate the same thing. I understand Mr. Collins' point, but if we had something down there where parents could still keep half an eye on the game, the soccer game going on, and their children on the playground without having them way back behind the school out of sight, I would feel more comfortable with that. And I would also point out that Mr. Clark's department had a fresh last month needs assessment, and this data, that's what's the data from the needs analysis is what's driving his recommendations here. And so the people have reported that that's something that they think is a necessity for that park.
So just back on that one more time. So it's called Sealston Sports Complex, and the money that's been put into that is for to play sports and to make money off of sports and people to enjoy sports. It's not there as a playground. And besides, even if your child is on the playground and your other child is playing sports, there's no way that you can keep an eye, a 7-year-old on a piece of equipment and help them not get hurt from watching a baseball or a soccer game. So I disagree with the argument.
Mr. Chair, I just want to jump in. One comment on.
Thank you. I was going to jump down to both of you.
Okay. But just this one point on for Sealston, it is, if you want to attract tournaments and you want to attract the people that are going to come and use your facilities to make money for the Parks and Rec system, you need to be a friendly environment that they want to come and host their tournament. So that's one way you make it more attractive to bring in those big tournaments, is to have the facilities, to have the amenities, some of the amenities. So I'm just putting it out there as someone who's done some research on it.
So if I want to go watch sports, and so I can have my kid play in something, and I should have a dog park there too, because I want to bring my dog. And I want to be able to see my dog. So I'm just telling you what my arguments are. And
Yep, we got them.
Yep.
Mrs. Bender, what do you think about what would you like to see out of Parks and Rec for that?
I would say the ADA, the playground for the park, the capital equipment upgrades, and the restroom for Sidell Brooks.
Mr. Granger?
Capital equipment upgrades for soccer and batting cages and the restrooms at Sidell Brooks Junior Park.
And I am going to go with the capital equipment updates and park restrooms. I'll have to agree with Mr. Collins on the playground.
Mr. Granger, what were yours again? Just
The capital equipment upgrades and the restrooms.
okay, so
The two projects,
okay.
one for 75 and one for 395.
So we have consensus on the 75,000 and the 395.
Correct.
Yeah, I could just put in one more plug for Mr. Clark, and he does a great job, don't get me wrong. But, you have this nice 4th of July celebration that you do at Sealston, and it'd be nice to have a nice little area where those kids can kind of congregate by the stage, and you could have a nice little, what would be really nice is like a splash pad one day or something with a little water and just, that's why those kids want to be there. They don't, they like the fireworks, but hey, they also like the playgrounds too. So that's my plug, but y'all have spoken.
I would think we need a dunk tank Get Mr. Collins in there or something, 4th of July. They'd love that.
Where'd that come from?
So I think we've gone through our list here.
So if it's okay with you all, can I run down and make sure I've got everything? So starting with Parks and Rec, I have the 75,000 for the capital equipment upgrades and 395,000 for the restrooms at Sidell Brooks. For the schools, I've got the preschool study for 60,000, the school buses for 650,000, less the other monies that we've got in there. And the access control system for Potomac Elementary for 75,000. IT, everything. Community development, the 70,000 for the document scanning. General properties relocation for 350,000. The skid steer at 100,000 and ambulance replacement for 300,000.
And we didn't include the HVAC because we already approved that, right?
Right.
Okay. So that was my mistake earlier when I gave the number. I'd actually included that.
I was wondering because my numbers were.
Nope. That was my mistake. Thank you.
So I've got a total of 2,894,000 less the 394,000 that we're going to use from the bond interest for the schools, leaving that being 2.5 million in projects.
The one question I would have is, would you like us to ask Dr. Boyd about the roof replacement? I know it's not a roof. You're obviously not going to do a full replacement, but is there some repairs that need to be made?
The preschool roof, is that what you're saying?
Sir.
You can ask them, sure. When I asked him how much of a priority it was if we were to move forward with the preschool, I got the impression it was less of a priority, but it never hurts to get a very explicit answer from him.
Right.
So, Mr. Granger, also, they've dumped a lot of money in those roofs.
Yep.
And,
That building in general.
yep, so
All right, well, I'm going to ask.
a couple buckets of tar.
I'll listen to what he has to say, but I would really like to move forward with the preschool. I'm also I'm sorry, Mr. Stonehill, would you entertain me for a moment? Thank you, sir. I think Ms. Kupko is the only one who voted for it, but based on the numbers I'm seeing now, I'm actually going to change my vote for the ADA playground. I know that's only 2 of us then, but I'm just going to put that out there. I would actually like to see that project get.
This is at Potomac Elementary?
Yes, sir. The Potomac Elementary School ADA playground. So I'll just leave that out there. And if anyone else wants to say anything, they're welcome.
How about we bring it back and it'll be identified in here? And if we have another answer, or if we have some answers about whether it should stay in or not, you guys can take it out on what you ultimately adopt.
I would also like to have some more information, and I know they've had the equipment at the Barnesfield playground break down recently, and I just would like a little bit more information on how close that is to the end of life for that playground, understanding that it has a lifespan. And I know in the last couple of years, they've had several pieces that had to be repaired.
And maybe I stepped out for it, but relocation of general properties, is that, did we all agree for this year?
There was 3 who said yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, so there's a lot of money available, not saying to spend it all, but since there is a remaining, even though I suggested to go to next year for the Optimum system, maybe we can put it in here until we get the what you asked for,
Somebody come and explain it a little bit more.
so we can just put it in there, but you don't have to appropriate it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate y'all's help tonight. If anybody would entertain that.
Yeah, I think I was the only one originally.
Right.
I needed more information.
I'm going to put it on more solidly, but I'll be honest, I might want to take it off at the end as well. So, but yeah, if you want to make it a little more real and then have brief about it, I'm content with that perspective. So I think we want to add it as a placeholder at the moment.
And now I have one more thing, Mr. Chair, that I've thought of, because last week I went with Dr. Boyd looking for trophies in the old preschool. And Ms. Kupka and I see this, Ralph Bunch, and over the years that the school board and the school system has equipment and extra paper and that stored all over the place in different buildings. And we were talking about the relocation of general properties. Is it a big ask or consensus to maybe talk to Dr. Boyd about the possibility of maybe a smaller building going with the general properties building to house in a central location the school's extra stuff?
Mr. Chairman.
It might save us
Ms.
money.
Bender, can I address what she just said? So for 8 years, I tried to get that type of facility for the schools, and it never made it. So they do have stuff all over the place, and they have tons of stuff over at the preschool location. And I think that would be a really good fit for that property, along with general properties for storage. They're putting stuff in the middle school again. So they never have enough room to put all their stuff, and it's all spread out. And I think there's a bunch of school stuff in Ralph Bunch still, right? Is that correct, Ms. Kupka? County property?
I just think it would be a money saver too, because the potential of stuff getting ruined for being improperly stored would also be cut down. And it's just something to look at. I don't know how big of a building they would need, but I think it would be something positive.
So when you talk about the building, it's kind of like a general properties building. You just need to have it conditioned, a warehouse space with a 4 or 6 inch pad. So they're not really expensive.
Well, why wouldn't the school just do it themselves? Why tack on with general properties?
Because they haven't been funded for it, and the school board knows they have the need, but they don't have the will. In my experience on the 8 years, I don't know what their will is now.
Do they have room on their existing maintenance area over by the pit? Do you know?
No.
Mr. Chair, can I make a suggestion? So we had consensus for a new general properties building. Maybe we give the school board a poke once we get our general properties people moved out. Maybe they'd be interested in going where our general properties people are currently, and maybe they can hook themselves up with a lease for that space.
Sounds good, but so we're going to move on with, can you all just get this together, what we have, and I guess we're going to have another meet and bring it back and finalize it?
Do we need to have another work session, or can I just come to the September 6th board meeting and have all these projects that you all put in here and with the funding sources and the appropriation request?
So the only thing I'd ask about would be the Opticom preemption system and the idea of having a brief. So would we approve the project without appropriating funds? Is that the idea?
We could do that, and you could appropriate those at a later time.
We can talk to
or
Chief Moody about getting somebody here.
I'm just asking though, so that.
Or we could have somebody come maybe to the September 6th meeting and present something on that, and then you all can make a decision that night, and then we come back to the later meeting in September to appropriate.
Okay. I'm amenable to doing the 6th if everyone else is.
Yeah, I don't think we need to have another one to go over these numbers again. So September 6th would be good.
Okay.
All right, is that it, Mr. Miller?
That's all we have, yes.
All right, do we have a question?
I move to adjourn until Thursday, August 25th at 6:30.
No, it's at 6 p.m.
6 in the Revercombe
Here.
building. In the Revercombe building.
Second.
We have a motion properly seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We are adjourned.